Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Given the wider cultural context of mounting protest and physical trauma in which we find ourselves of late, we are honored that you would join us for this conversation with photographer and producer Zackary Drucker, legendary trans rights activist Rosalyne Blumenstein, and curator, photographer, and educator Alan Frame. Tonight's discussion offers a moment to reflect on the relationship between art and social justice. It is a small offering, but I hope it will furnish space for self-reflection, inspiration, and renewed energy for the urgent work that remains to be done to combat the many different forms of institutionalized discrimination that place LGBTQ and Black and Brown lives at risk. My name is Leslie Cozzi. I am the Associate Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and I had the great privilege to organize the exhibition Zackary Drucker Icons, which opened this past March as part of the BMA's 2020 focus on female-identified artists. Despite the COVID-related museum closure, the exhibition can be toured online and will remain on view when the museum reopens to the public, which we hope will take place in the fall. I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's participants. Zackary Drucker has reshaped contemporary conversations around gender presentation and identity, both within the art world and popular culture at large. Zackary's work in photography encompasses both deeply personal self-documentation, as well as more critically distanced, satirical send-ups of social norms and beauty conventions. She has collaborated widely, and even those of you who aren't familiar with her artistic practice likely have heard of Zackary's work in film and television. Among her many credits, Zackary was a producer and creative advisor on the Emmy-winning Amazon series Transparent, as well as the Emmy-nominated docu-series This Is Me. The BMA's presentation of Zackary's work juxtaposes two interrelated bodies of imagery that, both singly and together, demonstrate the importance of her photographic practice as a living archive of the trans community. Included are a group of arresting self-portraits that document medical interventions from banal eye exams to more invasive facial feminization procedures undertaken by Zackary in the past 4 years. Also included are Zackary's recent portraits of her muse and mentor, Rosalyne Blumenstein, a licensed clinical social worker whose advocacy over the past 3 decades has transformed our understanding of trans identity. Known affectionately to the artist and friends as Roz, Blumenstein directed the pioneering Gender Identity Project at what is now known as the New York Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center. Her memoir, Branded Tea, published in 2003, offers a hilarious and unflinching look at how society treats, or rather systematically mistreats, trans youth. It is a loving and delightfully foul-mouthed saga of addiction, abuse, recovery, and perseverance that I highly recommend for those of you who aren't familiar. The exhibition also features Roz's own archival photographs from the 1970s and 80s, showing her at work and at play, some of which will be shared here today. Moderating tonight's discussion is Alan Frame, a noted photographer and influential teacher who first became familiar with Zackary's work when she was his student at the School of Visual Arts in New York as an undergraduate. Alan belongs to a generation of photographers often associated with the LGBTQ counterculture of the 1980s, but he developed a distinctive visual aesthetic predicated on indeterminacy and drama that distinguishes his work from his peers. In addition to many years spent writing, directing, and performing in the theaters of London, New York, and Berlin, Alan has curated exhibitions and venues in New York City and internationally. Alan is not only one of the most astute photography critics working today, he is also one of the most intellectually generous people I know, and I'm thrilled to have him guiding tonight's discussion. As we transition to remote forms of culture, we have had to experiment with new platforms, so I want to take a brief moment to describe the format of tonight's event. What you are about to see is a pre-recorded discussion moderated by Alan between Zackary and Roz. Immediately following that, we'll go live for a participatory question and answer session so that everyone can join in the dialogue. We sincerely want to hear from everyone here with us tonight. I will be monitoring the comments throughout the broadcast, so if you would like to participate in the Q&A, please just post your questions below. I want to thank Alan, Zackary, and Roz for joining us from their respective coasts, and my BMA colleagues Tracy Beal and Andrea Boston for making tonight's event possible. Without further ado, Alan, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Leslie, for that generous introduction. And I also want to thank Tracy Beal and Andrea Boston for helping to coordinate this. And I'm so thrilled to be able to do this talk with Rosalyne and Zackary. So it's great to be with you in this venue. The first question I'm going to ask is directed to Zackary. Zackary, your groundbreaking series, Relationship, which was seen in the Whitney Biennial and then in further venues, was a collaboration with a romantic partner, Reese Ernst, a filmmaker and producer. With the pictures of Rosalyne, it feels more like a tribute to someone who's inspired you, who's been your mentor. In the process of doing this, what did you want to find out, or what did you learn about Rosalyne that you didn't know? And also, what about yourself? What did you learn about yourself?
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for that question. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful. I feel like it's just smiling goofball every time I'm on a live chat and face to face with people I love. So, it's been an incredible process putting this together with Leslie, Tracy, Andrea, and with you, Alan, and Roz. You both have been so monumental in my personal development and in my development as an artist. So in relationship, I was with Reese for many years, and it was early in our gender transitions. We were both photographers and filmmakers, and a camera, was a natural part of our dynamic, photographing our domestic life, our highs and lows, and at the time not thinking of it as art so much as just a diaristic impulse to capture love, which is so fleeting. And my project with Roz is very different, but comes from the same desire, I think, to connect with another human being at a heart level. I have always felt that photography is an excuse to fall in love with a person, even if it's a person you don't know on the street, even if it's just in that moment of that photograph being taken. And I met Roz socially through mutual friends at a party, and I knew who she was, truthfully. So my whole story about Roz is that I was doing an artist talk years ago at Otis, which is an art school here in Los Angeles, and one of the students brought me Branded Tea, which is Roz's book. You can see it sitting right there on the bench in the gallery. And Roz, wrote a very unfiltered autobiography in 2003 that really details the full scope of her life history. And in reading it, I was transported in such a visceral and textured, in fully embodied way to the 1960s and 70s in Times Square, this world of trans people surviving by sex work and the underground economy and the kind of clandestine social structures and spaces that they found. And it was such this incredible peek into my own history. And I think as a trans person, we're always trying to locate ourselves in a history and a tradition, because it's a community and an identity that we come to after our origins, after we start out being a part of a different community and a different family and a different culture. And I was approached by Aperture Magazine to create a body of work for Orlando. And Roz had become a friend at this point. We met at a party, and I was obviously immediately just captivated by her entire way of being, her sense of humor, and her insightful wisdom, which is so distilled. And in every moment, I just felt a deep heart connection. Maybe it's because we're both Jewish. Maybe it's because we're born 2 days apart. Who knows? And when Aperture reached out, I thought about Roz's archival images, because she has this incredible library of archival images, and to see and witness her evolution as a human and to really bring it into the present. And I was looking for an excuse to hang out with her. I was looking for an excuse to spend, you know, days with her on the weekends of just photographing and having fun and bonding. Yeah, those are the breadcrumbs that led me to photographing Roz.
Great. And Roz, could you answer that from your side? Well, like, what did you had known Zackary already, you were friends, but what did you learn through the process of this collaboration about Zackary or about yourself?
Well, first, I have to state that I can't believe she just said that my book was foul-mouthed. I'm stuck in foul mouth, and I didn't hear anything else. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I had presented like an Alice Walker book because it speaks in the vernacular and it doesn't sugarcoat stuff. But Zackary Drucker, Ms. Zackary Drucker. I fell in love with Zackary before I met Zackary because my late father's name was Zackary, spelled differently, and my nephew's name is Zackary, spelled differently. And when I had the opportunity to see Zackary in action, she was doing a fundraiser and showing some films, and she was getting a lot of flack from the audience because the audience felt that the director who directed one of the documentaries, it should have gone to a person of color, not a person of no color. Zackary stood there and listened and respected, and I'm very intuitive. I'm a trained clinician. I had the opportunity to not just watch her listen, but to take in the information. And then she showed up at a town hall meeting with a nonprofit and community members, many of whom were very angry, whether rightfully so or not. She sat there in the circle and listened. And I went to this event to be of assistance because of my clinical practice. But I really got to watch somebody take in information and be totally respectful and present. And I really appreciated that energy. And that is definitely how our relationship started to grow. So again, I am a clinician by training, but I'm still a very, very vain woman and have used the shape of my skin for many years to be a defense against the world. And I am getting up there in age. So when Zackary asked, can I shoot you? Not literally with a gun, but shoot you with a camera. I was really excited about the opportunity to be in front of a camera in regards to what she was presenting to me for the Aperture magazine. So it's been an honor and a privilege to be labeled your
How much
friend.
how much time did you two spend together to produce this series?
You know, we started, it's an ongoing project at this point, so we're not stopping, we're gonna keep going. But the first round of images we photographed in January 2019, I think every weekend, and with different levels of production. So, you know, some of the shots, you know, we started out, were just very observational. I followed Roz to her, oh my God, I'm forgetting it. The cha-cha, the...
Elsa.
Sorry, I just followed her to her
Elsa.
salsa class, which is one of the many things that she does. I was like, frozen. All I could think of was cha-cha heels. And we went to the beach together. We went, you know, we drove Mulholland Drive one day. And then ultimately we started photographing in Roz's apartment with lights and a makeup artist to kind of have higher production value. And most recently we've been photographing in the pre-COVID days some new work since this exhibition has been mounted. And I have a feeling we'll continue to. Roz,
I mean, that was Roz, that was such a great example of Zachary's aplomb as a public figure. And I've seen Zackary moderate talks or host talks and speak publicly. And you're right, she's so impressive. Zackary, just quickly, did that take practice, or is that just? I mean, I remember you. I do remember you as a student, and you were outspoken and articulate, and you know, somebody that I love to call on. But speaking publicly is another thing.
You guys are yeah, you're making me blush. I'm an introvert and sometimes performer. I absolutely had to learn. I think that teaching in my 20s as an adjunct art history teacher, art teacher, helped being able to improvise and honestly really absorbing yourself in the words that are coming out of a person's mouth and getting, you know, silencing your own internal monologue, I think is the key to being an active listener. Really being present, paying attention to what a person is presenting to you and listening empathically. So yeah, it's funny. I think, you know, there's so many thoughts that our minds contain in one moment. But to be able to strip all that away and just listen, I think makes for a good talk show host, which is what I've always wanted to be. So this is, every time I get on stage, every time I have a public moment in my mind, I'm a talk show host. That's
Well,
the trick.
I totally identify. I feel that way when I'm in the classroom even. But
Yeah.
in the exhibition, I'm curious about the contrast between the realism and this heightened glamour that appears in the portraits of Rosalyne. Zackary, your self-portraits that you're showing in this exhibition, you know, are this kind of straightforward, realistic view of your face being marked for facial feminization surgery. And Rosalyn's portraits, on the other hand, are so glamorous and have such a heightened sense of cinematic fantasy. I mean, she really comes through as that goddess that you have described her as. What about this contrast stylistically? And and then aside from that, how do you both feel about glamour itself? And has living in Los Angeles affected your experience of that for yourselves?
Roz, you go first.
Good. Okay. So, first, Alan, those pictures she presented are not really that glamorous. That's how I wake up in the morning. I have no idea what you're talking about. And second, I'm mad at you because I was getting all emotional and you cut me off. So you might be a good professor, but not a good clinician. It's interesting. We did so many multivarious pictures and events, and my favorite one she doesn't show. We were on Mulholland Drive, and I put on a dungaree jacket, very little makeup, hair just blowing. And actually, for me, that is the most beautiful picture. Like I'm looking at Zackary's picture that we have up there right now. It doesn't matter what you do to Zackary. Her face is magnificent because her spirit is magnificent. So you see it in the context of her face. But my favorite shots that she has taken of me is when she's made me laugh, she's made me cry, and she just really celebrated the earthy component of me. So the last thing I'll say to that, I had the audacity to move to Hollywood, a woman in her 40s. That makes absolutely no sense. So it's really challenged my ego and my sense of my own womanhood. So glamour is a component of LA and a component of Hollywood. So I definitely connect to that glamorous side of me as well. And if I have the opportunity to have done anything in my life, besides these fabulous photographs, I hope I've touched people in such a way that now they can take 3 steps forward and make some incremental change.
You know, I feel I've been photographing myself since I was 5 years old. That's what I consider my earliest art practice, or these photographs, these Polaroid pictures that my parents would take of me. I would dress up in my mom's old drag, her old prom dresses and dance costumes, and like wrap a scarf around my head. And I have this collection of Polaroids of me as all these different feminine selves. And I continued doing that through my adolescence, through my teenage years, and even the work that I made with you at SBA they were all self-portraits. So photographing myself is sort of a life's project in a way. Photographing myself, you know, I think is an opportunity to present more real and human version of who I am. And you may notice, Roz, at this very moment, the victorious picture of you on the top of Mulholland Drive was in fact included in this PowerPoint as a little surprise.
That's such a gorgeous picture. I love that the landscape is in the background.
Yeah, she brings it up all the time. How could they have not included that in this? So I wanted to make sure it was included.
Wait a second. So that gorgeous picture, and Alan says, "Look at the landscape." What the hell?
Well, just because a number of the others are interior, and
I'm not talking to you anymore.
Zackary, since you mentioned this period of isolation and quarantine, I was going to ask you if for both of you, if it led to a necessary introspection, and I mean in general, not just for yourselves, but do you think for globally, like for all the people who went through this together, hopefully we're going to see something really positive coming out of that from people's self-examination, or are you not as optimistic?
I am optimistic, and I know that I, in a lot of ways, have the luxury to be optimistic. I think that this period has given everybody an opportunity to realign their values and to get in touch with the anchor within themselves, and that tremendous change and social transformation will happen as a result. I believe that the uprisings over the murder of George Floyd over the past 2 weeks has been an incredible coalescence of people all over the world saying enough is enough, and also looking at their own position in white supremacy and the ways in which they've benefited, and how we've been perhaps so distracted by a modern world that keeps us moving, that keeps us always looking forward, that we haven't been really there for each other as humans. An injustice to one is an injustice to all. And there is typically so much pulling us away from the human, the needs of other humans and our ecosystems. And without all of that, folks were able to mobilize and to look at something and really have to sit with themselves and say, well, what have I done for communities of color? And what more could I be doing? I think that it remains sort of yet to be seen, the lasting impacts that will have, the backlashes that we can expect as a result. But to have a united front of people who are fighting for a more just world. And the conditions of advanced capitalism haven't quite allowed for people to drop what they're doing and to be in the streets and to be having uncomfortable and critical conversations. I mean, it's a time of everybody is compromised and stretched thin, and so many people are in crisis. And when you're broken open, and when society starts to break open, there's an opportunity for growth and for change. So I think that this is a huge paradigm change. I do not think that capitalism will survive in the same way that it was, and I think it'll be all for the better. I think that we're going to have to give things up, and the result will be that we'll live in a more just world, you know?
And Rosalyne, as a clinician, with, you know, the intimate kind of conversations that you have, or listening that you do in therapy and therapeutic situations, what do you think the impact of the reaction, the uprising against police brutality recently is going to be on the trans communities of color?
So that's a question, because I don't want to speak for the trans population of color when I'm a person of little color. But I appreciate this conversation, and I think about theory and practice. And you asked Zackary about the downtime. I'm an essential worker, so I'm out in the populace serving patients and their families at home. So I'm driving from point A to point B, being out in the field all day, seeing my patients that are in their final stage of life and interacting with a tremendous amount of tension and anxiety and frustration and fear in our society, and people being cooped up. And I could remember when I was 16, and in my book, Branded Tea, I discuss a lot of this. But I was 16 and I was living in a hotel, Landsir Hotel. I was a runaway youth, and there were these two Black queens that lived in that hotel named Kelly and Vicky, who sort of took me under their wing and allowed me to become myself, gave me the energy. One day I woke up and they were like, oh, they threw Vicky off the roof last night and she's dead. And that was just, I was like horrified, and everybody just went like, okay, this is the life that you are coming into. So I've seen so many of my Black and brown sisters of trans experience be murdered over a 35, 16. So that's 44 years. I've seen that consistently happen. That was not publicized then, and it's publicized now. I saw the uprising, and I saw the difference between protests and rioters and looters. And I love the way that is totally explained. And people come to protest and riot and looting for multivarious reasons. I'm not saying one's good or bad. They just come to that fruition in their life for multivarious reasons. And I've seen, then I saw a group, a crowd of Black and brown men and women beating up one of their own, a trans woman of color, punching her. And I looked at that picture, everybody is dead except for me. I have no idea why I'm still alive and they're all gone, but I'm still here and they're not. That killed me when I saw all those people punching on this little slim trans woman. You know, it was horrific. But there's so much angst in the world, and I have friends, I'll say this and shut up. I have friends and people like Zackary in my life because I'm towards the end of my life. I've lived a wonderful, full existence. But I have somebody who's so optimistic and can see the hope and change reminds me that there still is hope and change. And that doesn't mean that I don't have that in myself, but I have to consistently have connections to people. My work is about death and dying, and my social life was so full before the pandemic, and now it's nothing.
Could we talk about this photo, Rosalyne? Because I know that we have a mutual friend in Laverne Cox, and that Laverne, the first time she saw you was at this march, and it was in this moment when you were giving this speech. Could you tell us about what was happening then and what this photo is showing us?
It's so interesting because I no longer am an activist. I cannot own that title, nor do I want to be identified as that. You have to put in the work to do it. And I left New York City after I got the New York Center to officially change the name to be inclusive of bisexual and trans people, and came to California to just be a Rosalyne again, because the movement was sort of discounting my heterosexual identity. And if you look at anything on CNN in 2019, 2020, the LGBTQI movement still discounts the heterosexual people of trans experience that could be and would be a part of the LGBTQI ... movement if they wouldn't disconnect the heteronormativity of so many people of trans experience that would maybe participate in a movement if it was more inclusive. But I had the opportunity to be in Bryant Park during Pride and talking about we will not be silent any longer. And it was such a powerful time in my life. And the part that was so powerful was working at the Gender Identity Project under my mentor, Dr. Barbara Warren, who founded the Gender Identity Project. I hired people that were a lot smarter than me. I spent many years on the street getting formally educated. I went back to school and got advanced degrees when I was older and became formally educated. But I spent many years in La La Land, so I wasn't able to really soak up information to make myself a really qualified activist. I came from my heart, and I hired people that came from their brain. So this is an opportunity to work with so many folks that showed up to our project, sort of educating and fighting back then the gay and lesbian community to be inclusive to bi and trans folks. And I left, I left that work tired of fighting everybody. That's not why I gave up my my childhood, my youth. That's not why I lived on the streets. I wanted to have an authentic life, and I was fighting everybody in the context of the gay and lesbian movement, in the context of mental health providers looking at trans people with a pathological connotation, not an identity that needs to be explored. So I had the opportunity to do some great work back then, and that was probably in like 2000, and to hear Laverne Cox, somebody who has it all. And I love that there are men and women of color, of trans experience, that are out there making such an extraordinary difference, which challenges what is the scale of how many trans women of color are consistently beat up or murdered or attacked or lashed out. It's sort of it's changing the balance. It used to be people were just killed. Now we have people in the forefront like Janet Mock and so many people that are brilliant, beautiful, delightful, exceptional men and women of color of trans experience leading a movement the way they want to lead it. So I have the utmost respect for what's happening. Me, I work as a clinician, and now I'm a consultant and a clinician for the Trans Latina Coalition. Bambi Salcido is the president, a woman of trans experience herself, running her own nonprofit. And Maria Roman is the vice president, not only a physically beautiful, powerful human being, but a woman that comes from the heart always comes from the heart. So I have an opportunity to be in the background, supporting people on the front line. What a gift.
Thank you so much, Rosalyne. You're extraordinary. And Zackary, it was just, I loved so much of what you said. Really powerful. Let's take some questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So we're now live. It's been exciting to see as I've been watching the public chat, so many people who I believe I've read about in Roz's book joining us here in the audience. That's wonderful. We wanted to, we haven't yet had anyone post questions, so I've come armed with a few things to talk about, but please do feel free to voice any questions that you have in the comment section below. To get us started talking a little bit while people are formulating their thoughts, I wondered if, Zackary, you could perhaps talk about the relationship in your work between your film and TV work and your photographic practice. Do you see them as distinct, or do you see them as on a continuum related to one another?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, they're definitely distinct, but related. I love that Bianca Lee is here. That's fabulous. Just a side note. I have always just been really committed to using all of the tools in my toolkit and all of the platforms I have access to expand our culture's notions of difference. And I think I first found art making as the place to do that. And when I was a young trans person, it was really inconceivable that you could have a kind of legitimate life in in really any sector of public life. It was just a much more challenging environment to think of yourself as a professional person. So as a young person, I found that art was a really incredible, rich space for invention, self-invention, and I was encouraged in that area and not other areas. It wasn't until Transparent came around that it was even, that I was ever even asked to be a part of something behind the scenes in terms of creating. And I think that art and film in Los Angeles, there is this kind of symbiotic relationship. And art has always been really impacted by entertainment and the proximity to Hollywood. So, I think that with this era of streaming content, there's more porousness. There's more kind of collaboration from people in adjacent fields of storytelling to be kind of authors and creators of mainstream stories, and all of those kind of hierarchies and obstacles that were preventing folks on the margin from participating in their stories are now on their way out.
That's interesting that you say that, because we just got a question from one of the people joining us today that really asks about the importance of listening. And Roz, you mentioned the importance of listening. So Zackary, also, I'm wondering if you can talk about how the conversations behind the scenes manifest themselves in the photographs.
Rosalyne Blumenstein, what a goddess! Look at her. I photographed her in that very room, a full nude of her as Venus. Leslie, your question was about conversations that happen in the creation of representations.
Yeah, like how does the dialogue between you as the photographer and Roz as the subject end up informing the final product?
It has, I mean, honestly, making these photographs was very organic, and Roz came up with a lot of the ideas. Yes, you did. And because she's brilliant and has an expansive imagination. And honestly, you know, I think that it's a very simple impulse, but we were really looking for an excuse to hang out. So
yeah.
I mean, so much is about that choice that you make about what person you're going to photograph that takes you there in the first place. And you know, obviously the choice of Rosalyne was hugely significant to you, and a great edit from all of your contacts and social experience. I mean, you know, I think that is just like that very first decision of who you're going to photograph is a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can I say something, or should I just pose?
You should say anything you
I
want.
can talk. Okay, good.
Well,
Thank you.
Go
can
for
I
it.
say something? I want to say something for Roz first. That Verna Smeraldi in the room says, "Thank you for underlining the need of inclusion and coalition in our journey towards equality." So just wanted to put that out there. No. Take the floor.
So Alan and Zoe is pissing me off. I'm not sure what that's about.
Interrupting.
I actually have just one more gripe. I didn't get a headpiece. Alan and Zackary got white little headpieces, and I didn't get anything. And I'm the one with the vocal tremor. So I think this is really a disability case that we're going to look into.
I'm gonna get you a pair. I will get you a pair. They're on their way. They're happening already.
I'm kidding.
There's a few people who are really interested in, you know, they're sort of pointing out the degree to which in some way American politics is sort of in this state of regression and reaction. And then against that, there's this sort of desire to push progress forward. And so I have a few questions about, you know, in thinking about this notion of transformation, which is so central to the photographs and so central to the work that you've done, Roz. One thing that kind of keeps coming up for me is how the violence that is often visited on transgender or genderqueer, gender nonconforming youth really kind of exacerbates the inherent vulnerability of youth. And so I have a question about what you think society needs to do in particular to support transgender youth so that they can experience, you know, that process of coming of age and coming into being in a way that kind of removes the unnecessary trauma while also allows them or like accommodates the process of maturation and change?
If I may, I think, so much has changed since the 70s, and so much has not changed. But the opportunity for the internet and access for information has really helped parents realize there's so much more to pink and blue. And the reality is the youth that are challenging the boundaries around sex and sexuality and identity, the youth that are dealing with more physical violence are youth of color, because the pedagogy of the oppressed. The oppressed oppresses, and then the oppressed that oppresses becomes the oppressor themselves. So if you're not living in an environment where you have less, you sort of beat down those people that have even less than you do. But I think a lot has been changing specifically for youth. The World Profession Association of Transgender Youth, of Transgender Health, has done a tremendous amount of work internationally around educating about youth and trans issues, and the religious right has started to challenge that because youth were getting more assistance clinically and medically and psychologically to review this experience as opposed to stuff the experience. So stuff is changing, but stuff is not changing.
Yeah, and I would just add that I'm working on a project right now that takes place in the early 70s, and I've been immersed in kind of like all the social upheaval that was happening at the time, all of the social change that happened in the late 60s, and the kind of unintended byproducts in the early 70s of it was a time of tremendous upheaval, and it also seemed very dark. And I think that we move through those times no matter what, and that trans and gender nonconforming people will exist forever, as long as there are humans. It's daunting sometimes to recognize the ways in which systemic oppression remains and repeats itself, and that all of the solutions, all of the things that previous social movements have tried, it begins to feel futile, that there's futility embedded into human experience. And I am always looking around the corner. I think that successful artists are often able to speak to the future, to speak to an audience in the future, and that many of many of the artists who are able to do that have an indelible impression through time. And we're here because of our predecessors, and it is generative, and we're really on the shoulders of the folks who've come before us. And I learned that, I think, at an early age. I grew up with a great-grandmother who was an immigrant, and a Jewish immigrant who evaded the Holocaust. And having this value of being able to reach through time by having a relationship with somebody who's older or younger than you is an incredible gift. And to pass those survival strategies forward. I'm finally, in a place in my life where I'm no longer the youngest, and I have friendships with, lots of younger people, young trans folks, even, kids. And their whole paradigm is different. Like I was with, one of my young friends, she's 8 years old, and she couldn't fathom that I wasn't able to play with Barbie dolls as a girl. Like she just couldn't understand why I didn't have girl toys as a kid. And, change happens over time and generationally. And I think that humans are haunted and doomed to repeat, the past. But hopefully we move the needle forward and all do our part.
Yeah. There's some interest in the comments about the relationship between the portraits that you took of Rosalyne and your self-portraits. But, I think if we're thinking about what the work that's in the exhibition, it's sort of tricky because the portraits of Rosalyne were fairly new, mostly from 2019 and even like December 2019, really down to the very end of organizing that. But your self-portraits span from 2016 to the present. So, how is the self-portraiture aspect of your work evolving now?
I think that with the series relationship that I made with Reese, had to kind of find my way back to photography. I feel like throughout my life, I've had to rediscover my love for making images, and usually it has a lot to do with loving myself, and making, these particular photographs, which are, unflattering, decidedly unflattering. And in moments of vulnerability, I think is a marker of this, personal evolution of no longer being caught up or concerned with appearances.
Yeah. Roz, do you feel like your relationship to the camera has changed over the years?
It's much more comfortable to be in front of a camera high on Quaaludes. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable for me to be in front of a camera anytime. I am very critical of my crooked face, but a component of my spirit wants to stay connected to theatrics. So any opportunity to be able to celebrate myself in a way that somebody could bring out the best in me, I will go for it. So my relationship, and it's an interesting question. I just turned 60. So, and you're all supposed to go, get the hell out of here. And this is not airbrushed. I mean, this is what it looks like. It's the Scotch tape. It's the Scotch tape in the back of the neck. But, you know, it's just an interesting place being an older woman and really have spent so much time, so much energy in your life utilizing the way you look as a defense mechanism against the world. So it's very interesting when you have a really good camera and you get to really see what you look like. It could be depressing. But when you have a photographer like Zackary Drucker, who takes the best, who ensures that lighting is fabulous, and then she does her magic. What a gift, what a gift.
And, you know, it was a gift for us to have these photographs in our show. And we are currently closed to the public, but we will be reopening. And I'm really hoping that for those of you that got the taste of the exhibition in the slideshow, you'll be able to see it in person. Oh, this is an interesting question for Alan.
I see that question. Right. Someone's asking what it was like to be
I'm on the edge of my
Zackary's
seat for this
professor.
one. It was so long ago, you probably hardly remember.
Oh, I remember vividly. I remember the other people that were in the class too. I remember certain conversations, but this is what keeps me going. This is the great privilege that I have of having really motivated, smart students, seeing them in the middle of their blossoming, fulfilling their potential, being able to encourage them, being able to learn from them, as I certainly did from Zackary. And one thing I really appreciated about Zackary was your interest in the history of the images that you were, the kind of, history of trans images, of depictions through different eras, and understanding the context in those eras and not necessarily dismissing them or judging them according to the standards of today, but really grappling with what the photographer, what the context was at the time. And the other thing I wanted to say about photography in general, because Zackary mentioned, coming and going from it, which I have also, is there's an immediacy about the making of photographs that can be exhausting. People talk about the decisive moment, but they don't really talk about the photographers having to act totally in the present, being alert to all sorts of dynamics that are happening. Most of all, social dynamics, the social psychology within a scene, especially in portraiture. And in portraiture, there are these great opportunities for connection within the photo opportunity of, spending time with your portrait subject. That time is so out of the world. I mean, out of time in a way. It's in time, you have to be very present, but it's out of time another way, because it's just something going on between you and the subject, this back and forth, this projection, this immersion and projection at the same time. And it's beautiful, and it comes through in your pictures together. And that's a gift for us to see.
Another really wonderful photographer whose work I have great respect for, Abbey Robinson, is saying, as a colleague of Alan's at SVA, he's not only a wonderful photographer, but an extraordinary and super generous teacher. So it's lovely to hear that.
Thank you, Abby.
But I also
She's
feel
great
like I should ask. I feel like I should ask Zackary the question that Alan asked you about what you learned from Rosalyne. Zackary, I'm curious what you learned from Alan. What did knowing his work bring you? How did that bring you to yours?
So many things. I think that Alan modeled for me that you can live an interesting life and integrate photography into your ecosystem in a way that's kind of natural and not performed or overdone. And I think, especially as a young person, you're really so conscious of of image and, you know, building things that are completely unique. But there is a kind of grace and subtle touch. Alan works with nuance, and his images are so, viscerally and aesthetically beautiful, while also being completely human and completely in the world. His images they don't exist outside of his life. They are his life.
One thing that Rosalyne referred to in the clinical experience, like joking with me, is how important listening is. And I think as a teacher, I started out talking, and I gradually did more listening. Rosalyne, you may be surprised by that, but I did listen.
Yeah.
I do think this exhibition is sort of an homage, not just to Zackary's work or to Rosalyne's work, but to the whole notion of mentorship. And, as part of the BMA's 2020 initiative, and sort of thinking about how women have changed other women, I think that's a really important point. And so we have another comment from someone who wanted to share, Heather Deal, that Rosalyne was my field instructor in hospice, and I owe so much to her as a teacher and mentor to me. So this theme of mentorship, I think, is something that really brings the three of you together in a really beautiful way. And I wanted to ask Roz. I wanted to quote a great writer. "It is now time to call out the healers and leaders of our communities. All of us, not only gay or lesbian identified people, need to heal from significant emotional, spiritual, and physical injustice." So if you couldn't already guess, that was Roz. I was quoting a speech that she made. And so I'm curious to hear from Roz in this moment where I think the necessity of both mutual care and self-care is more present than ever. What insights do you have to share with us as a healer? How can we be there for ourselves and for each other?
It's a tough time for the world. It's a very tough time for folks that have less. I think the importance of generosity, of wealth and spirit is key right now. I work for an amazing, I worked for a hospice care, but we have an amazing regional director that since this pandemic has set up meetings that we all connect to on our computer to talk about what's going on scientifically and how we protect ourselves, our patients, and their families. But also, she is a healer, and anyone could be a healer. Just listening to folks, just allowing people to cry. I laugh because I have to have the balance of laughter because I'm doing a lot of crying. And I have privilege. I have privilege in this life that I didn't totally earn, but I have some privilege. It's my responsibility to continuously move out of my self-centeredness and be of service to somebody else. And I used to love smiling at people when I walk by them on the street, but with the mask on, I'm trying to figure out how to do a smile with my eyes, not trying to get them to my bedroom. It's like, no, that's just a smile. Don't follow me home. But it's so important. There's so much hate out there on so many levels from all ends that my responsibility is to dig deep and bring out some of that love. And I met Zackary. We're from different worlds. I got so much love from her, and I got to celebrate life with her. And what a gift. And now I've had the opportunity, well, maybe not Alan, but I've had the opportunity to enjoy us. And I'm kidding, Alan, you too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an honor to have everyone and to have you with us to share the triumphs and the tragedies. I mean, I think that's knowing that you are formed by both, I think is important to keep in mind in this moment when sometimes the tragedy feels like it can be just overwhelming. So that I think that discussion of balance is, yeah, as the viewers are saying, beautifully said. Thank you. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up, so if anyone else wants to post their final questions, please do so. I want to ask one sort of final question that I have been thinking about as we've been talking about. Roz, I had actually sort of written a quote from your book that I think is also a quote about the pedagogy of the oppressed, that it's typical for the oppressed to oppress each other. And one thing that I will say that I have kind of become more aware of from working on this exhibition was just the degree to which there is a kind of lack of awareness, if not an outright hostility sometimes on the part of cisgender feminists towards transgender issues and the struggles that people of transgender experience in particular are facing. And I don't know if that has to do with a sort of underlying fear among women about femme presentations and a fear that reinforces some requirement that they themselves are trying to fight. But I'm curious for you how you would respond to those fears, or how you think feminism needs to evolve to fully advocate for transgender equality.
Me?
Zackary and Rob, that's both of you. You plural.
Zackary, first, you're younger, so you start first.
Oh, I think that many of the ways that we used to categorize folks are changing, and that the identity politics of the early 70s are so different than the identity politics of today, and our social movements, our movements for racial justice and for feminism and for trans rights and for prison abolition. All of these things are really, have an eye towards intersectional inclusion at this point, and a whole lexicon of understanding how we are, the privileges that we have, and where we, how we show up. I am a lifelong feminist. I, was taught by my mother as a child that is, so long as, a person believes that women deserve equity in all areas of society, pay equity, social equity, that is a feminist principle and a feminist structure. And it was like in my teenage years that I remember kind of being in some of these conversations where it was like, well, no, you can only be a pro-feminist man, because at the time I was, people were perceiving me as a boy. And it's funny because, I didn't identify as a boy, even though I was perceived as one. And like the notion that it was an early example of realizing that it's kind of arbitrary to pretend that you know what somebody's gender is, and for some people to be disqualified from feminism because of their assigned sex at birth. And I'm just thrilled that we've kind of surpassed that, and that the whole of I mean, it's really like 98% of self-identifying feminists are down for trans equality. And then it's just this very tiny but vocal percentage of you know, folks who believe in biological determinism, which is that, you know, your sex at birth, your assigned sex at birth determines forever who you are, which is exactly aligned with the administration, you know, that's causing all kinds of pain and chaos for all kinds of people. So, you know, I hope that that kind of small faction of trans exclusive feminism is, I hope that it'll be like a distant memory.
Mm.
Okay.
So, currently, right now, I work in the for-profit medical field. So, I'm not doing what I did in New York, where I was involved in trainings around cultural diversity and challenging the hierarchy of privilege. And that was some great work, and you know, I was growing intellectually as I was doing that work. But we used to, Dr. Barbara Warren, myself used to go around doing trainings for addiction-funded programs, and we would do trainings with straight white men. And I'm not knocking straight white men. I've been in love with quite a few straight white men in my life. But we were training them on understanding their false sense of privilege and white supremacy. And most of the men can never get to that Oprah Winfrey aha moment. So when you talk about feminists that are challenged by specifically women of trans experience, or who are either overtly hyposexual, or men of trans experience that have given up their female privilege to get false male privilege, I try to remind folks that when you piss me off, it's something that's coming from within myself that I have to look at. If it didn't touch something within me, I might not have a problem with it. So I'm always asking people to look in to see where is that coming from, and if that doesn't work, I give them the finger.
Somebody's just got to cut to the chase. I think I don't know, Alan, if you had any final questions that you wanted to offer, or anything I maybe missed in the public chat.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about and digesting what's just been said. That was really, it's an interesting subject to get into.
Yeah. If not, I will say, I think I might go ahead and say we can wrap up here. It's been a real honor and pleasure to work with all three of you as part of this project, both the exhibition and this program. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. I want to thank everyone in the audience who was just so wonderfully enthusiastic and positive in their reception and appreciation of this. This program will be posted on the Baltimore Museum of Art's Facebook page, so you'll be able to access it afterwards. And I hope everyone can stay safe, stay sane. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Thanks,
Thank you
Leslie.
for being
Thanks, everybody.
here.
Thank you.